Welcome to the webinar, the Self-Storage Revenue Playbook. Boost occupancy, pricing, and profit. Brought to you by the Storage Group. We have over 15 years of experience of working with self-storage facilities to maximize their online presence. We offer progressive websites, targeted digital advertising, and online rental software, helping facilities like yours gain visibility, convert more renters, and generate revenue. Enjoy the webinar.
Hello, everyone, and welcome in. My name is Jessica Johnson. I am the Director of Marketing here at the Storage Group. And for those of you that don't know, the Storage Group is a full website development company and digital advertising agency, specifically helping people in the self-storage industry. Thank you for being here with us today. Today, our Megabyte webinar is all about the self-storage playbook, how to boost occupancy, pricing, and profit. So we're going to talk about a lot of pricing strategies, ancillary income items that can draw revenue into your business, and just overall what you should be doing out there to stay competitive, because we are in a really competitive market these days. And I'm going to bring up my speakers here just in a second. And for anyone, while we're doing this webinar, if you have any questions for us, please feel free to enter those questions into the comment section. That's where we will be able to engage with you and answer your questions live. You don't have to wait till the end. You can absolutely ask us as we are going through today's session. So I'm going to go ahead and bring up my first guest with us today. I have Brooke from Storage Defender. Welcome in, Brooke.
Thank you, Jessica, for having me. I'm Brooke Bland, Marketing Manager here at Storage Defender. We specialize in smart unit monitoring to connect tenants to their storage units through real-time text alerts, while also helping owners make more money, right? Which is what we're here to talk about today. So
absolutely. So excited for you to be here. Makes total sense for you to be here with your products and service that you guys offer over at Storage Defender. So thanks for being here.
Of course.
Awesome. And next up, I have Warren Lieberman from Veritech Solutions. Hey, Warren.
Hello there. Hey, Jessica. Thank you very much. And thanks to the Storage Group. President of Veritech Solutions, although it does not have an H in it. So it's just, there you go, Veritec. And we provide pricing software and support to a lot of the multi-store portfolios in the industry. So we think we've got a great system to help operators maximize their revenue and price very efficiently.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Warren. I'm going to bring Brooke back up. And, you know, to get us started, what you were just saying there, Warren, I mean, this is actually really critical with things that are going on today. Obviously, you know, there's a little bit of lull in self-storage. Occupancy isn't what it was a couple of years ago. There's been decreases in occupancy. So we need to make sure that we are optimizing wherever we can to pull the triggers to pull additional revenue in, whether that be through ECRIs and rate increases, you know, not offering super low introductory rates and doing heavy discounts, and then offering some of those ancillary income items like Brooke's company does over at Storage Defender. So let's get us kicked off. Brooke, I'm going to shoot this one over to you. How has the revenue game changed in the last 2 to 3 years in self-storage compared to what we're looking at right now?
Yeah, I feel like historically storage was just, you know, a room with the door that people were selling. But I think today we're finding that it's a lot more than that, right? Finding other ways to make revenue beyond rent, right? So I feel like 10 years ago, tenant insurance, making that mandated across all tenants wasn't really something people thought tenants would buy into or even pay for, right? But now it's a standard across pretty much every rental, right? So what we're kind of seeing from our end is the same thing with like smart unit monitoring, right? So 7 years ago, we pioneered it, introduced it to the self-storage space because nothing was monitoring the inside of self-storage units before that, right? So 7 years ago, our CEO was told no one is going to pay for that, right? But today we've seen a huge shift in the market, and especially in the SSA demand study, tenants value having a connection to their storage unit, right? Especially the modern renters, millennials, Gen Z, right? So now we're seeing it become standard across portfolios such as Storage Asset Management, who's rolling us out across 600 stores across 37 states, right? And then you look at the SSA demand study, it's showing that 61% of tenants value it as a feature in their unit, right? So everything is going beyond just that one individual unit. It's all about finding other ways to drive more revenue beyond just rent, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's so many options out there too. One of your product's a great product. And I always love to joke with people and say, guys, I mean, they did a focus group study. These are answers from your consumer. This is your consumer saying to you, I will pay more for this. Listen to your consumers and adapt. Don't stay stagnant and not, look at some of these studies and good resources that are put out there for you from the industry experts, at the national SSA level and even at some of the state levels, vendor, other owners, et cetera. There's a lot of knowledge out there about some of this stuff. So, Warren, I'm going to direct this one over to you. We're seeing a lot of discounting to get people in the door as an acquisition strategy, right? And unfortunately, that's being heavily driven by some of the strategies by some of the larger players out there, specifically the REITs. But what's the most effective way to increase occupancy without relying on some of those deep discounts? And I think you have a chart here that will kind of talk us through this a little bit too.
I do, Jessica. Thank you. And I would say, what we're seeing here on this chart is really, and it even goes to your initial question about how things have changed over the last, let's call it decade, as what Brooke was talking about. A decade ago, if you had a group of 10 by 10 climate control first floor units, and let's just say you had 40 of them, you were typically renting them all for the same price. Maybe if you were on one of the more advanced operators, you might take the 5 of those that were really convenient to the front, or if they were upstairs near an elevator, you'd separate them out into a separate unit group and charge a little bit more. But the other 35 were still selling for a single price. About a decade ago, we introduced value pricing, good, better, best pricing. And StorageMart was the first company to actually implement it. And this chart that you're looking at right now is about as good a chart as any that we've seen that demonstrates how value pricing, especially in today's environment, can be used to combat lower prices. What you're looking at this chart is 4 lines. The red line is, let's call it the baseline. That might be what you're moved people in if they come into the store. But we now know that relative to a decade ago, a lot more people are making bookings online. And so, and maybe it's like 40, 50, 60% of the move-ins come from online reservations. Because online prices tend to be lower than in-store rates now, you can see there on the blue line, which is below the red line, that's kind of showing, relatively speaking, and this is for a sample of a few thousand stores, that the actual move-in rate when people move in at the base level is below the in-store rate. No surprise there, because the web rates where a lot of people are moving in at tend to be lower than the in-store rate. What folks don't always realize is that with the more and most convenient units, when you're pricing them higher than the base level unit, a lot of people are moving in. We see upgrade rates, depending on the store, typically of 25 to 50%. 50% is more common for lease-up stores, for example. And if you look at the move-in rent per square foot for the better and the best units, it's even higher than what the undiscounted in-store rate is. And so when you are using value pricing, it's probably the most effective, I'll call it, strategy that a company can implement for combating low prices. There's other stuff that I would say, but maybe enough for now. But I think this chart just highlights so well why this good, better, best, or value pricing is so key for the success of a lot of stores, and overall we're seeing incremental revenues of anywhere from 4 to 10% just from that capability from new move-ins.
Yeah, absolutely. And we ensure as a website developer at the storage group that we display that properly on the website for people to be able to easily view it, quickly see the difference in value in those different, good, better, best pricing and unit types. So they can quickly make a decision. I mean, and people are already used to transacting this way, from like buying airline tickets or buying concert tickets, and consumer data shows that people really do value the convenience of being able to do that selection on their own, right?
Yeah.
And then the more and more as we shift generationally, and the boomers kind of are starting to phase out, and the millennials are getting older, and then the Gen Zers are coming up, and then we've got the whole new alpha, which they scare me. My kid's an alpha. I'm like, this kid's going to rule the world with technology. He's 10 years old. He could do way more than I could ever do at 44. But anyway, we're going to see this increase even more, because this is the way those generations want to transact. And we see that in consumer data reports as well. So this stuff is really critical from an execution standpoint, knowing where to adjust, how to price, how to use the good, better, best methodology and practice, and then how to display it and get people, selecting from your website and making that selection on their own.
Yeah, you're absolutely right on that, I would say, because 10 years ago, value pricing, good, better, best pricing wasn't even available on websites. It was being done only at the store. Now that it's on the website, and you're finding more and more advances on the way the websites can represent it, it's becoming even more effective. And companies are more and more, again, to Brooke's point earlier, companies are becoming more active where they look for opportunities to increase rent. They're more data driven in the way they're being managed, more professionally being managed. All sorts of things are going on to make this a more and a more important element of a revenue maximization strategy.
Yeah. And I'll say this too. I think some owners and operators get a little bit scared of offering this online and letting the consumer pick, versus them trying to have maybe a staff member sell them through the process and or upsell them. You can also set automation in the technology to push them to the next level. Let's say they get that baseline one where you can say, hey, for $25 more, whatever that price differential is, wouldn't you rather be on the first floor climate controlled versus outdoor not? So there's ways to even trigger that as a selling agent for you as well, the way your website could be designed. So there's a lot that you can do with this technology.
I have one more note on that.
Yeah,
I know we've talked about value-based pricing for location, but I work really closely with all of our facility partners with their websites, right, to get smart units promoted on them. But we see some of them are using value-based pricing to not only upsell based on location, but locks, insurance, smart unit monitoring, or like ingrained maps. So you can pick exactly where your storage unit is on the map, right? One thing the storage group has that I love, right? So there are options beyond location. So what I love about value-based pricing is you can get creative based on what you want to upsell based on your property. And some of our partners are seeing more than 40% of tenants are choosing that better and best tier, right? That's awesome. That's almost half. So why not, guys? So definitely look into it if you have.
Yeah, I mean, those are numbers that will move the needle, right? If it was like less than 10%, maybe that's a priority, but not a high priority. 40%, I'm probably looking at that, right? I mean, like, there's proof in the pudding there. And that kind of gets me to my next question, where we have a lot of owners, and I'll direct this over to you, Warren. We'll talk about this a little bit. Really have that misnomer about, occupancy versus profitability. And I'll give you an example. A lot of them say, like, I'm 96% occupied, or I'm 100% occupied. Like, I'm doing great. Well, what's your economic occupancy? Like, what's the actual money that you're collecting on those units, aside from all the concessions and discounts and ghost units and free units you gave your cousins, sisters, and brothers and uncles at your facility, things like that. So Talk to me a little bit about that, where, how operators should really be thinking about occupancy versus profitability.
Yep. It's a very interesting question. And a lot of this really ties into what an operator's rent increase strategy is. One of the things that we've done some research and development on is understanding how effective move-in concessions are, and what does that mean, and then what does it mean for rent, and what does it mean for revenue and occupancy and all of that. And for many companies, not all, but for many companies, it giving a promotion does move the needle on occupancy. It does stimulate demand. Now, if you're giving the first month off or free, or 80% off, whatever it is, a lot of times it's great if you can give that to the first full month. So you don't give it to the month for that they move in, but you make it the second month. So you don't, so to speak, rent out a unit for a week or 2 weeks and then not get anything. But once you bring folks in, now the question is, if you brought them in at less than market rate, have you been transparent with them on when they might be due for a rent increase, or how quickly? So we have, again, it ties a little bit back to the value pricing. We have some operators who, when you rent that best unit, kind of as Brooke was saying, it's not just about convenience. They might give a 12-month rate lock, 15-month rate lock. You pay more, you're getting maybe a more convenient unit, maybe you're getting a better door as well, whatever it is, you're getting the lock, but you're also locked in to not have a rent increase in a certain amount of time. Maybe if you rent the better unit, that rate lock is for a shorter period of time, and maybe even the good unit, it's 3 months or 5 months or 6 months, whatever it is. But you want to be transparent with your customers on when their rate may go up if it's a promotional rate. Now, one of the things, and again, if you want, I think you may have a graph on this.
Is this one more on graph 2?
I will show you. Yeah, this is a very good graph, I think. Thank you.
You're welcome.
What this is showing is that over time, folks who were in their units for a longer period of time, you can generally raise their rates to much higher than street rate. And if they're in the more convenient units in a unit group, they'll pay even more than the folks who are in the, let's call it convenient or inconvenient or least convenient units within that unit group. This is just a nice example from a case study that we did, where I would say the people who are longer term customers are paying 60% more than the average rate of the folks who have moved in the last year or so. Okay? And the folks who are in the most convenient are paying 90% more. So part of all of this depends, going to your question, once you bring people in, it's not really about 96% occupied. It's what have you done with the rates of those folks over time? Because once people are in their unit, the only way you're making additional revenue is through the rent increases. And so those two capabilities really tie in one to the other very importantly.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this stuff is very critical stuff for the health of your business, right?
Yeah.
Talk about, and just when you do this, the amount of valuation you can add to your property if your long-term goal is to sell and not hold. I mean, these are critical things that, and there are sharks out there in the investor world that are looking for properties that aren't doing this because they know that there's instant value add and they can kind of come in and undercut your price. And they have validity to do that because you're not optimizing in some of these, triggers that you can pull. Brooke, I'm going to pass this one over to you. What marketing channels are actually driving quality tenants today from what you're seeing?
This is a good question, right? Because first of all, how do you get tenants in the door, right? So across our partners across 42 states, we're seeing that about 45% of rentals are coming from online, 30% are coming from the call center, and about 25% are coming from at the counter or a call to the store, right? So online, first of all, do you have a website? Please make sure you do. If you don't, please get with the storage group to get that started, right? Making sure your website has seamless mobile rentals, right? A lot of people are looking online before they even rent a unit to price match. So making sure your website is viewable from your phone is key. Also, make sure please go through the online rental process for your facility yourself. Because if it annoys you, it's going to annoy the tenant 100%, right? So feel free to secret shop yourself, even your call centers as well. Why not, right? And now, of course, there's chat bots, the huge popularity of that. Having someone there to chat with the tenant when you're not available to answer all of the questions that they have. And then, of course, a way to target those abandoned carts. If your website provider is not helping you go after those lost leads, you might need to look at a new website provider, right? Jessica, any thoughts from your end on anything website?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say, your last point about abandoned carts, we do offer that. And like Brooke said, please make sure you're working with a provider that does, where they can even track like where the abandonment process is happening in your online rental process. You can fine tune it and say like, people are dropping off at page 2 at this certain point. Well, if that the majority is ruling that, then obviously there's something that consumers are telling you they don't like about that process. But the trigger, because, think of it. I say this a lot, and the stats probably gone down even lower. I think the last I've read this was a couple of years ago. A goldfish has an attention span of like 8 or 9 seconds. Well, a human's is even less than a goldfish, right? And there's rules out there about, your website needs to load in less than 3 seconds. It's probably even down more to like 2.3 to 2.5 seconds for a tolerance level, because if that spins, there's no loyalty here, right? They're just going to go on to the next one that's priced relatively close to you or has the same amenities. And we see in a lot of markets from, the 1, 3, and 5 mile, yes, there's differences amongst facilities, but not by like these long stretches, right? They're all relatively similar. So yeah, the abandonment, so people just get distracted, right? They may have had every single intention of renting with you. And what we see from our abandonment emails is about 50% do come back and complete the rental. So if you can capture 50% by a simple trigger that's set up on the back end of your website, why wouldn't you have that type of automated trigger set up for you? This is operational efficiency that's going to, create profitability for you in the long run. So yeah, these are all really great channels. We also have, Brooke, you had mentioned like the AI chatbots and AI phone agents. Obviously, AI is a very popular topic right now in self-storage. We offer 2 of those products. And it is helping, reduce calls that come into the office for common questions like unit pricing, availability, gate code access, things like that. We see a lot of that in our chat histories that we can review. And the cool thing with these products is they become sales agents for you too, because they're on 24/7. The AI chat and the AI phone never gets tired. It's not a human. So it will stay on 24/7 for you. So if you have that odd person out there that wants to rent a unit at 2 a.m. and they can take themselves through the journey, and if they get caught, they can utilize the chatbot or the phone assistant to kind of help them through the process. So these are all really good things. I mean, we've seen major shifts as operators. It used to be like walk-in, phone call, website. Now it's website, phone call, walk-in, mainly, especially with lots of facilities going into like the remote model and trying to like master the craft of remote management. I don't think anyone out there, to be honest with you, in my humble opinion, has mastered it, by the way. Even the big boys. I've rented from a big boy recently, and I promise you their system was not sound. Or as sound as you would think it is. They gave me a unit that was already occupied. I had to come back in, redo a lease, re-sign a lease. Talk about being frustrated, especially being in the industry and thinking, hey, this guy should have this down, right? and they didn't. So these are all good channels. Let's see. We've got a question from Mr. Jim Mooney. Warren, any great tips for implementing value pricing? Hi, Jim. Thanks for the question. That's a great question. Warren, I'll let you take that one.
Oh, the first answer I have to give is incredibly self-serving, so I have to apologize for this. All right. About 10 years ago, we introduced this fully automated behind-the-scenes process where it introduced value pricing for a company. And so there was no operational requirement, if you will. Everything was, the units were being assigned to prices, everything being done automatically. So the incredibly self-serving comment, which I apologize for, is if you're using the Veritech revenue management pricing system, all that's done behind the scenes, automatically, dynamically, and you don't have to do anything, and it works great. Okay, if you have a lease-up store, so you have a lot of availability, we've actually worked with companies that they would actually identify certain units that should be sold at better, sold at best, sold at the good rate, and you can separate them out into separate unit groups, but it's a pain to manage. And that's why it's kind of like, you can do it. You got to have the staff to be able to do it. Generally, that can be done for a limited number of stores on a manual basis. And you can just implement it manually. I don't like to recommend it because it's not always easy. And when you get to a mature store, it becomes much more difficult. There are static versions of value pricing where you assign units to a price tier and they don't change. They all come with various inefficiencies. Like you could be sold out of your good units and you're no longer price competitive, or you get sold out of your best units and you no longer have them at that price. So I apologize for the self-serving answer. But in a sense, that's kind of why we ended up getting the methodology patented, is because it was such an innovation in the industry. And I'm still trying to figure out how to advise companies to implement it without our system.
Well, and I think people just need to think economically and logically at this point that it makes sense to let tech take its place where it's served, right?
Yeah.
I mean, because for instance, you just mentioned that, Warren. I know a group. I want to say this area manager friend of mine that I know. Maybe they have 5 to 9 locations, somewhere within that range. So a decent little size portfolio that's looking to grow. All manual. Do you know how many units this man has across those 5 or 9 locations? Like a lot. This is days worth of work. So, he's an area, he's probably getting paid 22 or upward an hour, where you could put the technology in place. He still could manage the process, right? But let the tech do the work, the heavy lifting for you. And then you just come in and make sure that the tech and everything is correct. And then you go from there.
Yeah. Jessica, you've kind of actually highlighted something that's kind of an interesting thing. Value pricing, and you've kind of seen it a little bit through the slides, it provides such a big lift. And remember, when somebody moves in, if they're paying 20% more because they're in a best unit, or 10% more because they're in a better unit, they're paying that every month for as long as they rent the lease. So the incremental dollars add up to a very significant amount of time. Now, it's actually, if you don't use technology to implement it, it's probably worth paying somebody, as this is their job, is to do all this allocation and reallocation every day. It's not a huge amount of work, but it's enough work that if you are paying somebody, you're going to more make up for their salary. I don't particularly like to recommend that as a strategy, because nobody really wants to add costs like that. But the revenue more than covers for something like that. But again, to your point, this is where nobody's questioning right now whether artificial intelligence is going to be eventually supporting a lot of reporting capabilities, and as Brooke said, adding to the chatbots, all of that stuff. And this is where, as an operator, you end up making the decision about whether you want to really take advantage of the technology that's out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thanks for that answer, Warren, and all great points that you had in answering that for us. And Jim's got another question. This one's for you, Brooke. And I think he's specifically talking about the Storage Defender product, but what is one tip for adding it to customers who might balk? And this could be for any ancillary product, tenant protection, tenant insurance, right? Oh, I don't need that because of this. But maybe specific for Storage Defender, what's that look like?
Yeah, so well, nationally, we're in over 42 states. One tip for tenants who might balk for smart units, I would say we recommend offering the first month free, right?
Okay.
Give them the first month of the service free. That way they can see the service, use it, and then 9 times out of 10, they keep the service. Sure. Like that's the strategy that Rightmove Storage uses across their 50 plus locations with Storage Defender. And 9 out of 10 tenants are opting into the service with that first month free. And on average, each property is earning an average of about $50,000 in revenue per year, just by offering smart units.
And doesn't Rightmove, like Darren's group and them, like, aren't all of their units smart units? That's just part of their business model. Like, yeah,
they're full smart facility, smart portfolio, and tenants love the service. I think more than 8 out of 10 of them said they would recommend it to a friend, if I'm referencing my internal case study.
That's awesome.
So yeah, give the first month free, and tenants love it, and they don't back out. It's like having a Ring doorbell for your unit. Why would you not want to have that experience, right?
Yeah, absolutely, definitely. Warren, this one's for you, and I think I'm going to bring up that there's 2 charts again that will be relative to this, but how can operators reduce churn and keep their units filled longer? I think this one was one we wanted to talk about, and then another one. So I'll let you start here.
All right. So when carrying out rent increases, in my mind, the biggest change over the last 2 decades in rent increases has been, I'll call it, flipping the issue. A lot of companies used to do rent increase based on, you know what, we're trying to get a 7% increase in our revenue. So they would give everybody who's eligible for a rent increase a 7% rent increase, or whatever their number was. And then they would look at each lease and decide whether to give it a little bit more than 7, a little bit less than 7, whatever. That was flipped, I would say, and you know, we flipped that in the way we did it about a decade ago, where we said, you know what, let's look at the reasons why somebody should get a big rent increase or a lower rent increase, and then do the override process. The easy example is, if somebody is paying a lot less than street rate, and you've got no vacancies in your unit group, you don't really need to worry too much about if they move out due to a rent increase, because if they do move out, you're likely to fill their unit with somebody who's paying more than them. And so that's an example of where you can afford to have a little bit more churn and be more aggressive on a rent increase. On the other hand, if somebody is paying a lot more than street rate, and you've got a lot of vacancies in their unit group, you may want to be a lot more cautious, and that's where you want to reduce the churn. So what we ended up doing was identifying, if you will, what the financial risk to a company is from its rent increases. And we kind of identified who should get a big rent increase and who should not. And what that ended up doing was giving a greater overall effective rent increase to the group, while resulting in lower churn, because we were better able right from the beginning to identify who should not get a big rent increase, and we could lower their churn. So the chart that you have now that you're showing this is kind of like an illustration of the fact that, you know what, when you give a rent increase, and let's call it anything below 8%. So let's call it 3%, 4%, 5%. As you get up to about 8%, the likelihood of churn is not very much different. That is, if you give an average rent increase of 2% versus 8%, you know what? You're going to be seeing about the same number of move-outs. As you get above that, you begin to see more churn. So what happens here, and I know it's a long answer to your question, but what happens is there is good churn and there is not so good churn, right? Good churn is when somebody's paying a lot less than what you could otherwise rent that unit for. And if they move out, you don't have to worry about that as much. Bad churn is when you're going to be having an empty unit because that person moved out. What you need to do to combat bad churn is to make sure that the people who are staying are more than making up for the rent that you lose from the people who are moving out. Now, if you give an average rent increase of only 5 or 6%, it's very hard to do that. In other words, the people who are paying 5% more who stay aren't making up for the revenue that you lose from the people who got that rent increase and moved out. As you get to 9, 10% rent increases, you may get a little bit more churn, but not so much that you can't make up for that lost revenue more easily. And so what we try to do is help companies identify who should get a larger rent increase, who should not, so that they can reduce the churn where they don't want to see it. And this is a great example of, unlike Jim's question on value pricing, that's a great example of, if you don't want to work with a revenue management provider, you can develop your own Excel models that will score leases, will identify leases that you want to be more cautious about, and those that you can be more aggressive about. And you can work with your own spreadsheets to identify how you should be and where you should be on which leases more aggressive and which not. And especially in today's environment where there can be very low move-in rates and companies are beginning to think about raising rents earlier on the rental process than they might otherwise have done, that kind of process becomes extremely valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can't tell you how many operators I talk to that it's like this blanketed percent or this blanketed dollar amount across the entire portfolio all at once. Like, there is a huge balancing act to this, like Warren was saying about testing like the temperature on those high value versus low value and which ones you can push and which ones you shouldn't push and how much you should push versus how, there's a lot that goes into this. I really call it like art, science, math, and some madness, right, Warren? Like it's a lot of stuff that goes into it.
It's definitely a blend of art and science. I think there's a lot of science, though, that is very, very helpful. Again, I've said before, but being data-driven, because then after the fact, after you do these rent increases, you want to make sure you've got your processes in place to take a look at what your move-out rate was from the leases that got a rent increase and being able to measure the impact of the rent increases. And all of that allows you to become smarter about your strategic amounts of rent increases, your policies, your frequency of rent increases for the future. So part of the data-driven game is learning how to use your data so that you can become smarter with your decisions over time. Because the one thing you want to be able to do is every year, you want to be able to look back, say, here's what I'm doing now, here's what I did a year ago. And yes, I'm using my data to be more productive and to generate more revenue than I used to. And what will happen is every year you might make a small step, but after 3 to 5 years, those small steps add up. And now you see yourself as, I've really come a long way over that period of time.
Yeah, absolutely. And Brooke, this kind of segues into the next question. There's also like a marketing play that we can do on rent increases. So how do you balance street rates versus existing tenant rate increases? I mean, I think one of the easiest ways is to show them the value of why that's happening. And what are some of those value triggers that you see out there, Brooke, that people use?
Yeah. So many of our customers, try and do the rate increase straight across the board, kind of like you said, Jessica. And at times it doesn't work, right? Because it really is a balancing act, like you guys said. So what we've seen is tenants are more accepting to a price increase if you give something that they value, right? So many of our customers will offer and provide either 24/7 access to those with the rate increase for like $10, $12 a month, however much you're doing, or offering smart unit monitoring, right? Like, hey, your rent's going to go up $12. However, you're getting this new service. It's going to text you anytime there's any activity in your unit, right? That way it's something that they can see, something that they can use, something that they value actually having, right? So that's kind of one of the strategies that we're seeing across the board.
That's awesome. Warren, how often should operators consider adjusting their rates? There's the one I use within my locations is we do the 699, so 6 month, 9 month, 9 month. We're kind of old school. I'd say that's like one of the older school ones out there, right? Or one that's traditionally been around for a while, and it works. We might get a little more aggressive. We're watching occupancy to see how we strategize and combat that. But what are some other things that you see out there, and how often should they be changing, but how often should they be looking? Some say once a month, some say once a week, some say once a day.
So a lot of this, I want to say the right answer, I think, depends a lot on the company's philosophy, strategy, what it wants to do. So I don't think that there is necessarily the right answer for everyone, because companies are equipped to handle customer concerns a little bit differently. Some companies have a strategy of being the highest in the market. Some companies have a strategy of being the lowest in the market. And all those strategies play into, I think, what's the right cadence for a rent increase. So with that caveat in mind, I would say, generally speaking, we are very cautious about when folks are getting multiple rent increases in the same calendar year. So a 6/9, 6/10, 6/11 process, all that's good. I get nervous about every 6 months. Doesn't mean that it can't be profitable. But, I would say for a lot of companies, they're not really equipped to handle rent increases that frequently. And if you do it, you definitely want to make sure you're monitoring what the impact is. For a lot of companies, especially when we're in Las Vegas at a conference, I just recommend do 7 and 11. First rent increase after 7, every other rent increase after 11. And that gets people moving around. People are not getting the once a year rent increase. And if you're a company that currently has annual rent increases, that you get it every 12 months, moving to a 7-11 is an incremental adjustment. And I like moving to something a little bit more productive rather than taking a big fell swoop to go to something, 7-9. If you're at an annual rent increase, I'm kind of comfortable going to every 11 months before I go to every 9 months. So you can get used to it, because the folks in your own company need to be prepared to deal with customer reactions. So we have seen that if you give the first rent increase earlier than 6 months, now it's a question of how large an increase is. Are the customers prepared for it? So if you bring folks in at a low rate, and when I say low rate, maybe let's say something like 60% below street normal market rate, you don't want to do that without making sure that the customer is very aware that the rate they're in is a promotional rate. Otherwise, it generates a lot of churn and it generates a lot of ill will. And that's what you got to be careful about. If you're giving a 15% or 10% increase after 6-7 months, we've seen customers generally be very accepting of that. It's different if it's a 40% increase. Now, again, different markets can be different. So there's no rule that's true everywhere. But what I kind of say is, you got to make sure the customers understand what's going to be happening, especially if you're giving that initial rent increase within the first 6 months.
Yeah, so you'll see a lot of people are listing this in their leases where there's like a guarantee of like the rate schedule to make people feel more confident. Sadly, a lot of our tenants don't read the full lease, but it would be a good area to train your
Yeah.
staff on, at least if they're going through some of the key points of your lease in that leasing process, that they at least point that out, like, hey, expect this type of rate increase schedule. We are seeing legislation in several states. California and New York are
Yeah.
two of the most prominent ones in my mind right now, as far as where rate control and rent control are coming into legislation, where we have to be combative about it. U-Haul is taking a stance. They're doing a rate lock for all new customers for 1 solid year, to try to take a stance against some of this stuff that's going on in the industry. So there's all kinds of scenarios out there. But again, like Warren said, whatever the methodology it is for your core business and your business model that works for you, and test some of this, try the 6-9. If you don't like that, try the 7-11 that Warren was recommending. But I would say proceed with caution, because there definitely is more of an awareness out there from the consumer perspective, where they could start raising their hands and getting more legislation out there than we already have going on.
Yeah. And Jessica, I got to say, you're exactly right. When people are renting a unit, there's a lot going on, and it's just too much information to be even thinking about rent increases with all of the other stuff going on. So even when you tell them about it, even if you get them to sign a piece of paper that says, I'm aware of this, a lot of folks are going to forget. And what you have to remember, and I'll use an airline analogy for this one. If I tell you that you can fly from Miami to San Francisco for $49, you know that rate is not the normal rate. Everybody is kind of comfortable. They know what an airline is valued at, if you will, what a flight is valued at. If I tell you, I'll say New York City, you can rent a 10 by 10 for $89. You have very little ability, if you will, to say, is $89 really high, really low? I mean, people don't have that frame of reference.
They don't.
And so that's where that's where the legislation, I think, is coming from, because people are not having that same frame of reference. So you tell them it's $89, they say, great, that's what it is. Then you realize if they get a notice 2 months later that, well, you know what, your rate is going up to $300, they're shocked, because they had no frame of reference to say, this is what it really is going for. This is what the market rate is going for.
Yeah.
And it's important to understand that that's where self-storage is a little bit different than a lot of industries where we commonly do it. If you think about your subscription phone service, health, fitness, anything, streaming, Netflix, whatever, you don't get huge increases several months after you sign up. And so that's a different situation.
Yeah, absolutely. More annually, and even the annual is very low, depending on what some of them are. But I would say, consumers are used to this. There's also seasonality plays that you can do into your rate increases. I live in Florida. We probably we should, and we do increase our rents in July and August. It's hotter than a match outside, and no one, especially if they have an outdoor unit, wants to be in that climate, schlepping their stuff in over 100+ degree weather in hot humidity. They just don't. Same could be applicable up north. You hit them in, November and December and January, when there's snowstorms, and they don't want to come move in the snow. So you got to get on a certain cadence. And I believe, seasonality also is another play. Aside from rate increases, Brooke, and we have about 10 more minutes. And audience, if you have any final questions for us while we're here, please feel free to ask those. But beyond occupancy and pricing, there's the ancillary income side. What are some hidden profit opportunities out there that you see that operators are maybe sleeping on right now that they should be aware of?
Yeah, it's a good question. So of course you have, boxes, locks, merchandise that can get you an extra $10 to over $350 per lease, depending on, that tenant. But, the SSA demand study, you guys should definitely take a look at it, but it shows the top 10 features that tenants are willing to pay more for, right? And two of them are anytime access, right? You can charge an extra $12 to $20 each month. And then, of course, as I've said again and again, smart unit monitoring, right? Which can get you that extra $12 to $20 a month, right? So with anytime access, we've really seen that, you know, if you are offering that for free, I hope you are not having anyone sleeping overnight in any of your units or anything like that. We've seen that happen pretty commonly with people who offer it for free. But we've noticed that if you start charging for it, who are those tenants you're going to attract, right? It's going to be those commercial tenants, those fishermen, the hunters, the one that actually need to access their unit super early in the morning or super late at night, right? So if you're not charging or offering anytime access, I would definitely recommend taking a look at it. And then, of course, if you want to learn more about smart unit monitoring, feel free to reach out to me. My email is brooke@storage-defender.com, and I will stop the sales pitch there. And then, of course, value-based pricing, as we've already touched on, huge key for upselling tenants and personalizing that experience and giving them choice over their unit, right? Jessica, Warren, anything that I might have missed from y'all's end on that topic?
Let's see. I mean, I definitely think, you know, as far as like retail stuff goes, selling insurance products is a major one. That one drives a lot of revenue, whether it be tenant protection or tenant insurance. Both programs are suitable and have their pros and cons. So make sure you just talk to your provider about the differences between the two and select which one's best for you based on your business and operational model. But have seen huge profitability driven from those type of programs. Moving trucks is another one. Sometimes people don't like the hassle that the moving trucks are worth what the revenue they get. So you really need to play that balancing act and figure out what's right for you as it relates to moving trucks. Because I say it is a little bit cumbersome in executing it, but there's a lot of good services out there like U-Haul and On the Move that actually help you with this too, and give you the proper training to get that sold. So I think that those are some good ones as well. So I'm going to do a quick speed round before we end here in the next couple minutes, because I do want to do a couple closing announcements because there's upcoming events that we are attending. Brooke, I know you're attending one because you'll be there, or your team will be there with me, but we'll see where Warren and his team will be out in the wild. But quick speed round. What trends will shape the self-storage revenue game over the next 12 to 24 months? I'll start with you, Brooke, and then I'll go to Warren, and then we'll close out.
Yeah, so right now, millennials are the largest age group within self-storage, right? And Gen Zs, which is me, is following pretty quick, right? So they're entering the storage industry, and, you know, Gen Z has had technology in every single part of their lives, right? I grew up and I had my first phone in like first grade, like that early. And so you need to start adapting to the needs and the demands that those renters are going to have, right? They want it to be modern, they want to be connected, they want it to be personalized and in control, and they want to be able to talk to a person when they want to, but not all the time, right? So just make sure you're anticipating those needs and shaping the future of your facility to meet that demand.
Yeah, absolutely. Warren, how about you?
Yeah, I think if we're talking the next 12 to 24 months, I think the single greatest change is going to be related to the extent to which artificial intelligence capabilities start changing this industry. You're going to see good implementations. You're going to see bad implementations. Some companies are going to be making mistakes. This is going to be an area that will I never like to say there's a huge change coming in 12 to 24 months because just things take a lot longer. But artificial intelligence capabilities, if you will, are getting into the hands of everyday people, so to speak, much faster than I had thought even a year or two ago. It's now happening. It's now at the very early stages. But it's going to be affecting chatbots. It's going to be affecting the rental process. It's going to be affecting the way you communicate with your revenue management systems, with overlays, large language models, behind the scenes models. So I would say that there's going to be winners and losers in this game, but this is an area that I would stress people should be paying attention to understand it, because it's going to have far-reaching implications beyond those which we're kind of even just generally understanding and thinking about at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. We see a lot of shifts. Last year it was survive 2025, and now the new mantra out there is going to be we're going to be great in 2028. So they think we're going to take a couple more years to recover with what's going on. But I always like to remind people out there that you are basing a lot of that on COVID data, which is an anomaly, and our industry grew up like 10 years in the course of like 2 to 3. That's unheard of. That's laser speed. So we are kind of in a normal phase right now, but I think it's going to take us a little bit longer to get out of because of what's going on in the economy, the world, interest rates, etc. People still sadly are just not moving. And we hope to soon see an uptick, because that's a direct impact to our industry, as you both know. So thank you guys for joining us today. If anyone wants to get in touch with either Brooke from Storage Defender about their products and program, or Warren from Veritech about their products and program, we will send all of the follow-up information to you after today's webinar. You will also get a recording of this, and you can always come back and watch on our YouTube channel. You can follow us on social media. The Storage Group is on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, and X, as well as YouTube. And I believe your companies probably are respectively on most of those channels as well. And just a couple announcements of where we will be going in the month of May. So we will be at the California Napa event. Well, I think I saw Mark will be there, Brooke. Mark's coming from your group. Warren, anybody from Veritech going to Cali?
Not clear yet. I don't know that we're going to be able to make that one. We are going to be in mid-May at the North Carolina Self-Storage Association. I know we have a speaking slot. We're going to be speaking there. Steve Kretsch, one of my colleagues, will be at that one.
Awesome. So that's the North Carolina seminar in the month of May. Go see Warren there. Brooke and I believe, I don't know if it's you, Brooke, or someone from your team, we will be at the Northeast Expo. That's in mid-May, May 13th and 14th, I believe, up in Connecticut. And then the Storage Group will also be at the Canadian show in Whistler on those same dates, May 13th and 14th. Anybody from your teams going to Canada or Northeast?
No, Northeast, of course.
Okay, awesome. Well, we hope to see you guys out in the wild. If you see any of us out there, please feel free to stop by and introduce yourself or say hello if you know us. All of us would be happy to connect with you. And if I could just have the audience stick around for one moment, I'm going to put up a couple QR codes for you to scan if you want some further information from the Storage Group. Brooke and Warren, thank you again so much for being here with us today. Always a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Take care. All right, everyone, I'm going to put up a couple QR codes. We have a product showcase that will be coming up in May. That is on May 19th. We have another webinar, another Megabyte webinar, just like today. That'll be on May 21st at 2 p.m. That one is peak season readiness. Our entire theme for the month of May is being operationally ready for your busy season to make sure you are capitalizing in every possible way that you can. So stay tuned for those banners, scan that QR code, and sign up with us. And we will see you guys next month. Thanks for joining us today. Take care, everyone.